My name is Jim Foley. I have the privilege of working here at the University of Montana as the Executive Vice President. And on behalf of President Dennison, the faculty, the staff, and the students, I want to welcome you to what will be the first of the Stan Kimmitt Lecture on Public Service, which was created by his 5 children, some of whom are here tonight, and I'll introduce them here in a little bit. Stan, as many of you know, is a former Secretary of the U.S. Senate and a legendary aide to the late Senator Mike Mansfield. The siblings of the family are Robert Kimmitt, Mark Kimmitt, Jay Kimmitt, Mary Laxton, and Judy Rainey. They also created the University of Montana internship to honor their father. The intern will serve in Senator Baucus's office this summer, and the decision on who that will be decided this week, and they'll go back to Washington. And by the way, here's the key part. Having worked in Washington for a while, it's a paid internship. So the students kind of like that. What I'd like to do before we get started, and I want to do this fairly quickly, is make a couple of introductions. Professor Drake, Richard Drake, Professor Jim Lopatch, and Dean Jim McCusick, who are here tonight, are really the folks who were behind not only choosing the intern, but will be behind choosing future speakers for this President's Lecture Series, which next year they will be in charge of the speaker and this event. And so thank you all for the work that you've done on it and the work you went through to choose the intern for Senator Baucus. We will rotate the intern, by the way, in the delegation, so the next one will go to Senator Tester, and the one after that will go to Congressman Denny Rehberg. I'd also like to introduce Jane Dennison, who's here with us tonight. The President is traveling back from Washington. She's here with us tonight in the front row. Then I would like to introduce the Provost and the Academic Vice President of the University of Montana, Royce Engstrom, and his wife Mary, who are here in the front row. And if I may, because they have spent so much time putting this together, not only tonight, but working with the professors on the internship, and we're back in Washington last week with an event to raise the money to put this on in perpetuity as we go forward, I'd like to introduce Kathleen Collins, who's the Assistant to the President, who's to my right, your left over there, and Rob Gannon, who's a Special Assistant in the President's office, who worked very hard to work with President Kerrey and others to make this happen tonight. Finally, I'd also like to introduce, I'm going to introduce a couple of others before I do that, State Senator Carol Williams, who's with us tonight. And as many of you know, she's a senator from Montana, and this is important. She is the majority leader of the Montana State Senate and the first woman elected majority leader in the Montana State Senate. Two more. It is an honor because I had the opportunity to work with him when I was employed in Congressman Williams' office. I'd like to introduce former senior senator from Montana, John Melcher. Before I move on for the background on Stan Kimmitt and who he was by Congressman Williams, it really is a pleasure, an honor, and a privilege to have gotten to know many of Stan and Eunice's children from my part and from many of us at the University of Montana. And so what I'd like to do is introduce Judy Kimmitt Rainey, who's in the front row, who joins us tonight. Mary Kimmitt Laxton, who joins us tonight. And Johanna Laxton, granddaughter of Stan Kimmitt, who joins us here tonight. She is taking a look at the University of Montana as a potential school, so treat her nice, will you? We need students here. Now what I'd like to do is introduce my friend and somebody who I had the privilege of working for 11 years when I was in Washington, D.C., Congressman Pat Williams. Pat Williams served Montana for 9 terms in the United States Congress. As Deputy Whip, Pat was part of the House leadership. He was also chairman of the House Post-Secondary Education Committee. He retired in 1997 from Congress and frankly came home to Montana because he wanted to teach and help students at the University of Montana. So he joined the teaching staff here at the university. Pat and Stan Kimmitt were good friends, and we've asked Pat to give us a brief remembrance of Mr. Kimmitt before we get started. So Pat?
Thanks a lot. Senator Kerrey asked me to have you all bunch up, but I think it would take too much time because you're scattered all over. Judy, Mary, Joanna, Jim, Senator Kerrey, President Kerrey. Distinguished guests, I'm delighted to say a few words about my old pal and John Melcher and Bob Kerrey's old pal, Stan Kimmitt. Public service and politics are about considerably more than asphalt or concrete or disagreements or agreements or election days. Stan Kimmitt seemed to have an innate understanding that government, particularly at the federal level, was or should be the positive instrument of our collective will. As assistant to Senator Mansfield, and later again under Mike, as Secretary to the United States Senate, Stan Kimmitt was a master of order, rules, procedure, and legislative box scores. But for all his expertise at arranging, assembling, disposing, one always had the very real sense that beyond Stan's impressive command of logistics was a deeper and more important mission to fulfill what he believed was his responsibility to his family, friends, fellow citizens, in short, to his country. Stan was a generous, agreeable, savvy, large-minded person who through the years never seemed to tire of the public's purpose. It was obvious that Stan Kimmitt was thrilled by government at its best, that is. He knew that government had and could again accomplish great things. He understood the authority and power of people acting together in pursuit of their common goal. I think Stan was always convinced that tomorrow's America held great promise, but he was also convinced that we had to be bold enough as a people to reach for it, grasp it, mold it, and send it out. Although he valued the ways of the U.S. Senate, although he understood the necessity of patience and compromise, I personally believe that Stan was pained by political posturing, bickering, and delay. He abhorred fear, blame, and division. During his time as Secretary of the Senate, Stan Kimmitt was, I will offer, just what the Senate needed: an efficient, polite, determined, courtly colonel, a wagon master with kid gloves and exquisite timing. One who, like his boss Mike Mansfield, quote, knew when to hold 'em and knew when to fold 'em. And Stan Kimmitt had, frankly, what many people believe the Congress needs: a real sense of humor. I, as a former state legislator and later a young D.C. staff assistant to my pal, then Congressman John Melcher, and later, when you sent me to the Congress, I took great delight in watching Stan Kimmitt at work. And those of you who are political wonks and understand the value of great staff will understand this. Watching Stan was to watch a tall, lean person at work, moving through the Senate corridors, you know, like a welterweight up on the balls of his feet, responsive, eager, sizing up the task, politely touching gloves, and then going to work like a political surgeon. I knew Stan for 39 years, albeit some of those were at a distance. My own belief is that the United States Congress has not had a more efficient, effective, or disciplined public service than your dad and grandpa. It seems to me that Stan was neither conservative nor liberal. He had that Western notion of doing whatever might work. However, I think he might have agreed with Emerson, who wrote, "Mankind is divided between the party of conservatism and the party of innovation, between the party of the past and the party of the future, between memory and hope." Stan's basis for public life was the latter, hope, followed by accomplishment. He did not for a minute believe that people were either infallible or incorruptible, but he did understand that history was inexorably moving and replete with the intricate intersections of both fatalities and fortuities. And Stan Kimmitt believed that an interested, aggressive citizenry can help determine history's course. Late in an election year like this one, October of 1960, another presidential candidate, Jack Kennedy, said this in Montana: "Finally, I believe in an America with a government of men devoted solely to the public interest, men of ability and dedication, free from conflict, corruption, or other commitments. A responsible government that is efficient and economical with a balanced budget through the years of the cycle, reducing its debt in prosperous years, a government willing to entrust to the people the facts that they need. Not a businessman's government, nor a labor government, nor a farmer's government, simply a government that we started out to be of, by, and for the people." That sounds like Stan to me. Last time Stan and I talked was in a little coffee shop over on Fulton Street, just across from the Montana Club in Helena. We met quickly and talked quickly, but as always, we fell right into world and domestic news and talk about government. After just a few minutes, it occurred to me that I was seeing a Stan I hadn't seen before. He was troubled, discouraged, and shaking his head, he said, "Oh, I don't know, Pat. I think we skipped a beat somewhere, probably temporary, but I think we skipped a beat somewhere." And then he pointed down and he said, "There's something wrong down there in the mainspring. There's something wrong." When I heard that Stan had died, I reread an article that had been written 47 years earlier by another presidential candidate, Adlai Stevenson. Like Stan's saying there's something wrong down there in the mainspring, Stevenson's short article was entitled "Our Broken Mainspring." So let me conclude this evening by reading you a paragraph from Stevenson's piece. He was talking about the 1950s and how our nation had set anchor and pulled down its sails. "I believe that phase is now passing. Our foolish languor has been shaken, if not shattered. We are more ready now to examine ourselves and our past record. And it is a privilege of our society that every citizen should make his and her own inquiry. If I stress one or the other aspects of the problem, that is simply my view, my angle of vision. You have yours. The urgent thing for us as Americans is to feel the need for rethinking and to set to work the ultimate energies of a free society, which cannot be done by the fiat of government, but only by the troubled conscience of responsible men and women. As I look at some of today's difficulties, I, like you, don't want to give up on America by any means, but I do wish that that tall, young, lean, on the balls of his feet, Stan Kimmitt, could have continued to help us out. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Pat. What I'd like to do next is introduce Judy Kimmitt Rainey, who is basically responsible for having President Kerrey join us here tonight and this afternoon with students and faculty, which is what he did. Judy has worked for the United States Senate for 30 years. She served under Bob Kerrey during his terms in the U.S. Senate, and she currently works for Senator Frank Lautenberg as his Deputy Chief of Staff. Please welcome Judy.
First of all, thank you very much, Congressman Williams, for those wonderful remarks about my father. You really captured him and made us miss him even more than we do. He is missed in many, many ways. On behalf of my brothers and sisters, I would like to thank President Dennison, Vice President Foley, and the University of Montana for hosting this lecture series in honor of our father. When our family was asked who should give the first lecture, I immediately thought of Bob Kerrey. I had the pleasure of working for President Kerrey when he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1988. If we're up to Bob, my entire introduction would comprise of about 15 words. Just say that we are friends, that I loved your dad, and that's why I'm here. But I told him I wanted to explain why he was chosen to start a lecture series that our family hopes will inspire and encourage people to go into public service. Bob was born in Lincoln, Nebraska, one of 7 children. His father was a builder, his mother a housewife. After graduating from the University of Nebraska, he enlisted in the Navy and became a member of the elite Navy SEALs. In 1969, 25-year-old Lieutenant Junior Grade Kerrey commanded a unit of Navy SEALs that were involved in an attack on the Viet Cong. His unit scaled a 350-foot sheer cliff in order to position themselves for the attack. During the course of the attack, a grenade exploded at the feet of Senator Kerrey, shattering his right leg below the knee. In spite of his severe injuries, he continued to direct the attack in a clear-thinking way that eventually led to victory by his Navy SEAL team. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for the events that occurred on that day. People have called him a hero because of his actions, but Bob has been uncomfortable with that title. I did something that was simply my duty. I didn't feel that evening that I had done anything necessarily out of the ordinary. Others don't see it in the same way. His friend and colleague, Senator Chuck Hagel, said, "A young man from the plains of Nebraska showed that exceptional heroism can spring from the humblest of roots. But the mark of a hero is what happens after the recognition. The mark of a hero is what one has taken in life, the good, the bad, and all that is in between, and how they have applied that to make the world better and what they have done to improve the lives of others. Bob went on to become a successful businessman, and in 1982 was elected governor of Nebraska. At the time, Nebraska was in the middle of a terrible budget and farm crisis. Over the next 4 years, he replaced the 3% deficit he inherited with a 7% surplus. He went on to be elected to the United States Senate in 1988. About a year and a half after Bob was elected to the Senate became embroiled in a heated and passionate debate about the need for a constitutional amendment to ban the burning of the American flag. My desk was just right outside of Bob's office, and I could hear him getting more and more angry as he listened to the debate on the floor of the Senate. He finally got up from his desk, said to his chief of staff, "I'm going to the floor." And shortly thereafter, we heard Bob begin to speak. He had no prepared remarks. He just spoke from his heart. In part, he said, "We frame the argument as those who are for this constitutional amendment are for people that wear the uniform of the United States of America, and those who are against the amendment are for flag burners. Shame on that argument, because that is not the issue here today. The issue is whether or not we believe in freedom. The issue is whether or not we can fearlessly hang on to that freedom and encourage human beings to express themselves, to listen to that beating heart inside of them that says to them, this is what you ought to do, in spite of what the majority says. Stand and say it. Stand and deliver your feelings, your beliefs, independent of what you think someone else might want you to do." People were afraid to argue against the constitutional amendment for fear of being called un-American, but Bob was not. His colleague, Senator Tom Daschle, said, "Senator Kerrey's greatest contribution to this Senate and to this nation may be that he is not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom. He was, and still is, highly regarded by both Democrats and Republicans, even among those who may disagree with him." As governor and as senator, Bob Kerrey fought to make sure government works for all Americans. Senator Harry Reid said, "Bob Kerrey, when dealing with entitlements, education, health care, and farm issues, has shown unparalleled courage." After leaving the U.S. Senate in 2000, Bob became president of the new school in New York City, a university founded on strong democratic ideals and daring educational practices. He has also served on a number of commissions and boards, probably the most well-known being the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, or the 9/11 Commission. I would like to finish my remarks with my favorite quote about Bob from Senator Barbara Boxer. "I consider working with Bob Kerrey an honor. It is always interesting, it is always exciting, it is always an experience you can never figure out until it actually happens. Because he is not someone who is driven by the ordinary, it is the extraordinary." So it is with great pleasure that I welcome the extraordinary Bob Kerrey.
Well, thank you, Judy, and thank you, Pat. Thank you, John, and thank you, Jim, and Jane, and everybody else that's welcomed me here. Rob, to you as well, to Missoula. I've been here before. I haven't been in Montana itself, though, since I campaigned with Max back in 1996, I think. So it is very nice to be back in Montana. I've got prepared remarks. I usually use opportunities like this to write things down, and may, because it's my practice, deviate considerably from them. So if you have an interest in what I actually wrote, you may have to get a copy of this thing afterwards. And Exhibit A, in deviating from prepared remarks, I do have to expand the introduction that Judy made, it sort of reminded me of a moment. There was a man that I know many of you do know, Frank Morrison. Frank was once introduced by me at an event, was just as flowery and at times inaccurate introduction. And Frank walked up and he says, "Bob, you've humbled me, but I'll get over it." Well, in I think 98 or 99, it was 99 because it was shortly after the end of the terrible impeachment trial in the United States Senate of the president. President Clinton did something quite remarkable. He upgraded the, I think, 23 or 4 Navy crosses that were given to Japanese Americans in World War II. And among those individuals was Danny Inouye from Hawaii. And I went down to the White House for the ceremony and sat in the ceremony and listened, as Danny did. Danny was the last one to go. And every single citation was the same. And these are M1 rifles that were being used, single-shot M1 rifles. And, you know, so-and-so killed 24 Germans or Japanese or whatever the case. And just citation after citation talked about their heroism and their success against the enemy. And Danny got up and spoke for me, and my guess is most people that have received awards of this kind, and said, you know, I've listened to these citations with great respect, and mine was read and it was approximately the same as all the others. And he said, I just wish that one of these awards had been given to the person that all of us consider a hero above and beyond anything that we ever did, and that's the medic or nurse that saved our lives. I wish one of the heroes that had been recognized hadn't taken lives, but had saved them. And the most important part of my military biography occurred in 1969 at the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, where I learned that the true measure of a man is not being able to do everything by themselves, but being brave enough to let somebody love you and let somebody help you and let somebody nurse you back to life. And that experience later, when I learned that there was a connection between the laws of Washington and my own health, formed the basis of my choosing the Democratic Party as a party to spend my political time with, because as wonderful as I think the market is, I spent a lot of my life in business. The market didn't build the Philadelphia Naval Hospital, and the market didn't hire the docs and the nurses and all the people that saved my life. And though I understand, you know, the problems with welfare and all that sort of thing, I've received a monthly check since 1969. It hasn't made me lazy, haven't caused me to produce illegitimate children. It's made me grateful to live in a country that would save the life of somebody who was quite angry. I would say almost as angry, perhaps more angry than Jeremiah Wright. So anyway, that's me deviating from the speech. Well, I love surprises, and I particularly love surprises that are qualified by something that makes somebody else feel good. And it makes me feel good to surprise somebody in that fashion. When I was a boy, I could never resist buying, and those of you who are old enough remember there were things that, you know, amaze your friends. You could buy these, you know, these sea monkeys or whatever it was. You know, I just couldn't resist them, and they amaze your friends. Anything that amazed my friends, I seemed like I bought it. It was no surprise to my friends that I entered politics, because I've been arguing with people since I was 5 years old, so it's like a hobby for me. None of them were surprised when in 1982 I became a candidate for the United States for the governor of the state of Nebraska. It was, on the other hand, a big surprise to my friends, and I must say a surprise to me that I ended up being a president of a university. I didn't really consider myself very well prepared for that particular job. In fact, it seems a miracle to me that I've survived now well beyond the median life expectancy for most men and women who find themselves temporarily in such a position. I'm amazed that George has survived 18 years. I mean, that's like the virgin birth for me. Anyway, I've managed to survive for two rather simple, but I think not often observed facts about American life. And first is that there's millions of people, men and women, who have chosen to work as faculty or as staff on colleges or universities across this country. And they believe that the mission of these institutions are vital for this survival of this experiment of ours in self-government. And for them, and now for me, higher education is much more of a cause than it is a job. Second, I've survived because of one of the most powerful instincts in America today, which is the urge and the need to give back, to make our communities better, to be generous to those in need. And the result of this instinct is that the United States of America, unique in the world, has developed a network of decentralized not-for-profit organizations, including, in my case, a private college. But just all over the country you see them. And some of them are run well, some of them aren't run well. But it gives the United States of America tremendous strength because the not-for-profit can typically do things that neither the government nor the private sector can do, can bring strength from both. But all of this depends upon this urge, this need for people to give large and small amounts of money to causes that they believe in, that they think are important. And it's unique. You don't see this kind of giving, this kind of support in any other country other than the United States of America. And so, to those of you who work at this university, and to those of you who have either given your time or money or have supported Carol and others who work in the Montana legislature to get the authorizations and appropriations that the University of Montana needs, I thank you, because you're doing a wonderful thing. These universities are terribly important, and though from time to time we wonder whether or not they're getting the job done, they are. Over time, they've transformed the nature of the United States of America. They've made us something other than what we would have been without them. I've taken 2 days out of my life here. I'm heading into commencement as well. More importantly, I'm heading into the day after commencement. My favorite day of the year. And I did it, as Judy said. I mean, Judy asked me, so not easy to say no to Judy Rainey. So she asked me, and I'm here. But I'm also here, and Pat said it much better than I, but I did admire the spirit and the life of Stanley Kimmitt, your father. And his energy and his belief in public service was quite remarkable. He believed in giving back. He lived his life that way. He believed in being generous. He lived his life that way. Now, here's a man who enables us to see the good we can do when we conquer innate selfishness and innate fear. It's a man whose public life allows us to see the life of one of this country's greatest statesmen, Mike Mansfield. That skinny man with a pipe did a lot more in one lifetime than most public servants do in 10. And I hope that his legacy and his example of integrity and old school values inspire and sustain Montana's current remarkable team of political leaders. Governor Brian Schweitzer and Senators Max Baucus and Tester and Congressman Dennis Rehberg, the only one of the group that I haven't met. I have chosen, first sort of accidentally, at first I agree to speak, and then my secretary comes in and says they want to know what the topic of the speech is, and so I picked it, and I sort of backfill afterwards, after I said I'm going to talk about the value of losing, because I do think it's an underrated value. I'm old enough, certainly, to remember Leo Durocher, and Leo Durocher, at least is reported to have said, show me someone who likes to lose, and I'll show you a loser. Well, it was a clever statement, and I'm sure it cheered up the owner, whoever team he was managing, and maybe it inspired the team before the game. But it doesn't do anything to help us face the most daunting of the challenges that we have in this miraculous existence of our lives. And that is that life itself is a continuous and relentless process of losing. The art of losing isn't so hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Thus spoke Elizabeth Bishop, much more wisely than Leo the Lip. Loss, however, is often a disaster. The loss of our parents, the loss of our friends, our children, our hair, our youth, our jobs, our optimism, our naivete, our joy, and finally our lives themselves. These are real disasters, big and small disasters that we as human beings have to face over the course of our lives. And we must find a way to survive, not the victories, those are the easy moments, but the losses. Viktor Frankl, who lost everything in the hellhole of Auschwitz, discovered something that he has given us in a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and that is that when everything is gone, the only thing we have left is our attitude, and it can never be taken away from us, and that this is the most important thing we own. The terrifying paradox, he said, is that when we control our attitude, it's apt to be the time when we have the least. And then when we have everything, it gets harder to control our attitudes. And he advised himself quite relentlessly that the pursuit of happiness, if that's our only goal, will end up in failure, bitter failure, most likely. I do turn from time to time to poetry, and just so you think I'm not going to bum you all out here with this depressing speech thus far, I just read you one closing stanza of Tennyson's Ulysses, and if you're over the age of 50 and you don't know this poem, I urge you to get a copy of it, and when life is treating you terrible and you've suffered some loss or some offense, just get it out and read it out loud to yourself and to others if necessary. And this is the last paragraph, the last stanza. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. It was approximately what Stanley Kimmitt told a young legislative assistant on the night of his death. And this evening, in my presentation to you, I'd like to talk a little bit about losses, mostly political. I'm not a psychologist or a philosopher or even much of a poet. I'm certainly not an expert on religion. I just can't imagine. I mean, I never thought I'd see a political campaign where a candidate's debating with his minister, and that would be my worst nightmare, having to debate my preacher. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about politics and the value of losing in American politics. Because on this subject, for both good and bad, I do think I'm prepared to offer a little advice based upon some useful observations that I've made. The first is I'm going to confine myself to two general subtopics. The first is the danger of public opinion, of which I am now a part. And the second is the value, the extraordinary value of lost causes. I'll illustrate the value of a lost cause with a single example, and that of a Iowa farm boy who I admire greatly and a geologist by the name of Claire Patterson. I'll offer three examples of lost causes where I do not believe marginal change is going to produce success, and where I think we need rabble-rousers, we need troublemakers, we need people who will stand up and tell us the truth and the facts, and that we've got to change, and change in large, not small ways. We need people who are willing to take on these lost causes. There are many other examples that I could give, but I'm going to pick three here this evening. And at some point I'll stop, and if you have an interest, I'll answer questions on other subjects that I haven't addressed if I know something about them. Although in truth, I'm prepared to act as if I know something about it, even if I don't. On the subject of public opinion, I haven't seen a quote any better than one that was reported by my father to have been uttered by Clarence Darrow in 1926 upon the occasion of being offered the role of defending Leopold Loeb in the crime of murdering their cousin just for the joy of showing they could do it. They had confessed to the crime, and the only question was whether or not they were going to get the death penalty or a sentence of life. And Darrell, again, according to my father, said something approximately this: the mob wanted the death penalty, and I'd only be appealing for a sentence of life. And I almost said no, because I was 68 and weary of standing on that thin and lonely line that separates the good from the most destructive force in America today, public opinion. We humans are fickle with our opinions, especially on topical issues of the day. Our views do not always rise to the level of being either well-informed or enlightened. Our fears, rumors, grievances even are apt to produce a conclusion as any rational assessment of the problem. And yet our political leaders, a bit of an oxymoron in this case, are constantly surveying us for our opinions before they vote on all questions, big or small. More to the danger of such behavior is this daunting truth: it isn't a determined majority that ends a political career, it's a determined minority. From the beginning, the survival of any democracy has depended upon an informed and enlightened citizenry. We tend to blame our representatives, in short, when oftentimes we have to look no further than ourselves for why our representatives are not behaving any differently. Again, from my father, he always quoted famous people from Chicago, and he said that Frank Lloyd Wright once was asked, how do you build beautiful houses? And he said, as I think we have to assess our own Congress, you can't build a house any better than you are. So from the beginning, we citizens have succeeded, and we have failed, to rise to meet the test of this daunting standard that's been set for our experiment in self-government. The optimists among us tend to focus on our success, and the cynics focus on failures. And we realistic skeptics see both. We love our country for our great moments, but we grieve our failures. Now, I'm going to short-circuit this because I could spend a lot of time talking about public opinion, and maybe will in the Q&A, but I just issue two brief warnings. The first comes from Sam Rayburn, who is reported to have said there are two kinds of people in Washington, D.C., those who can count and those who lose. And the second is an anonymous cynic who borrowed Archimedes' famous observation about the power of a lever and said, give me enough money to spend in D.C. and I can change the color of our flag. Public opinion is easy to move, and we have to be aware of it. I give you that warning based upon my own experience. We can be manipulated by the messages that are produced by a whole range of people that are trying to communicate with us. The third thing that I would say is that the rewards for those who seek and are able to compromise are too often held up as an example of something that ought to be done. And a painful corollary of that is that we tend to love open-mindedness, and we value and talk about open-mindedness, but God help a politician who starts off saying, I believe in this, and then as a consequence of being open-minded, changes their mind and believes in something else the next day. And if you believe that members of Congress go to the well of either the House or the Senate 100% certain every single time they vote, you believe something that's different than the way we ourselves are. It's rare that we're 100% certain. And when we are 100% certain, it's typically self-delusion that causes us to think that it's 100%. So the next thing I'd like to talk about, perhaps a bit longer, is the value of the lost cause itself. Now, I've experienced three kinds. Now, you may have experienced others, but I've experienced three kinds. The first, and the one that I value a great deal, is an individual willing to stand before an audience and actually court a round of boos for telling the audience what they don't want to hear. I spent 16 years in elected politics, and I could give you an applause line reading 3 sentences from a phone book. And you would think, just from the cadence of the applause line, that it's time to applaud. It's very easy to get an audience to applaud. It's much more dangerous and much more courageous for a speaker to come before us and tell us things that we don't necessarily want to hear, but are nonetheless true. I had a moment that I'll never forget in 1967 after completing underwater demolition team training. We were selected to go, and they called us volunteers for the various teams. And because the war was ramping up, there was a group of us who were selected to go into SEAL team. And we were invited to show up on Monday morning, and the commanding officer of SEAL team came into this concrete block building. We were all trying to pretend like we weren't afraid, standing in the middle of the room, sitting in the middle of the room, and all these guys came in and sat down next to us, and the commanding officer came in and he said, "Welcome to SEAL Team 1, you're all volunteers. And anybody that doesn't want to be a volunteer, just raise your hand, stand up, and we'll cut your orders right back out to the fleet." Now, it was the fleet we were trying to avoid by going into underwater demolition. And one of the trainees, a kid by the name of Thompson, was heavy, let's put it that way. And in the first part of underwater demolition training, the hardest thing to do was to do the obstacle course and all sorts of things that required upper body strength, and he couldn't do it. And he was substantially abused. So he endured a lot more than anybody else in our training program, in my view. And without a word, he stood and said no. Without a single word explanation why, he stood up and said no, and they hustled him out of the room. It was an act of profound bravery, because everybody in that room was saying yes. And he was willing to tolerate the consequences of saying no. And I consider that, and I could cite other examples, and I'm sure you can as well, of somebody willing to fight the lost cause, because often it's not when the person says no, everybody else says, you know, he's right, or says yes, and all of us are saying no, says, you know, he's right, I never thought about it that way, and suddenly the cause is not so lost anymore. The second example, and I'll give actually just one example of it, and that is the refusal to go along just to get along. It's peer pressure as a kid, but adults are the same. We have the same problem, and I probably picked this tie out just to make sure that I looked okay here in Missoula, and then nobody else is wearing ties, and I feel like an idiot for doing it. Paul Wellstone would be my best example. When Paul first came to the Senate, he came 2 years after I did, I went over to him and I said, Jesus, I don't think we need another self-righteous Jew in this body, you know, telling us that he's got everything figured out and all the rest of us are heartless conservatives that don't give a damn about anything. But the more I listened to Paul Wellstone, the more I fell in love with the guy. He was sincere, and he wasn't trying to make us feel badly. He just wasn't willing to go along to get along. And he almost single-handedly, in the early days of his arrival, changed the ethics around a number of things that the Senate and the House were doing at the time that were, in retrospect, undefensible. I mean, he just couldn't defend some of the things that were going on. And Paul would repeatedly perform in that fashion, just refusing, and I wouldn't say to perfection. A couple months before he was tragically killed, Paul said to me, I said, God, you look kind of worn out. He said, yeah, you know, I don't know what they're going to put on my gravestone. It's probably going to be something like, we don't know what he did, but he sure looked tired. Well, all those of us who knew Paul knew what he did, and what he did was he taught us the value of fighting the lost cause, and fighting in a way that, end of the day, made us feel good to participate, to be pushed, to be better than we were before. The third is one I'm going to give an example of, and that is you're just an individual, and these are the three examples I'm going to give of things where somebody or groups of people need to stand up just from the beginning and stay all the way through the criticism, all the way through the threats, all the way through the loss of friends and defeats and all the other things that come from taking on a cause and staying with it from beginning to end. Now, I have to say every single one of the presidential candidates are that way. There isn't a single one of them that doesn't get daily abuse in the blogs, that doesn't get heaped with criticism. This is what I would have done. This is what you should do. Why did you say that? Why did you do that? They have to be extraordinarily brave to endure what they endure in these campaigns. I happen to admire both pro-choice and anti-choice individuals. I happen to be pro-choice myself, But you get into that debate, and you find yourself admiring both sides. At least I do. I used to go to the floor of the Senate every single time Mark Hatfield, who was a wonderful human being, still is. Mark had served in the Second World War and was practically a pacifist from the experience. We had different views both on abortion and the death penalty, but I would listen to him every single time those issues were being debated on the floor of the Senate, because he spoke with such eloquence, with such sincerity, and so persuasively as well. Now, I'm going to give you an example of somebody this Claire Patterson that I like. Now, Claire Patterson, in the middle 1940s, I don't know what he was thinking, decided that he was going to study geology. Now, that was a losing decision as far as I'm concerned. I mean, physics were hot, chemistry was hot. Geology departments in the 1940s had to be the smallest, most underfunded departments in higher education in America. So he chooses geology, and he was urged by his advisor for his PhD program at the University of Chicago to use a new technique that had been developed to count basically lead isotopes in rocks, the lead that comes from uranium in igneous rocks, those rocks that aren't laid down by sediment. And he went through this extraordinary process. I mean, first he starts off and he just says, this is a hard thing to do. I didn't realize there's so much lead in the atmosphere. So he had to build a sterile laboratory to make it work. It took him 7 years to get it done. In his department, they didn't even have a calculator, an adding machine. I don't know how he did the calculation. It took him 7 years to finally come up with his answer for the age of the Earth, 4.3 billion years or so, and it hasn't changed much more than 50 or 60 million years over the last 50 years. So it was an extraordinary discovery. But he didn't stop there. He said, there's something wrong with all this. Where does all this lead come from in the atmosphere? And what he discovered was that starting in 1923 with the introduction of tetraethyl lead to gasoline, we started seeing a lot of lead in the atmosphere. And he said all the science that was being used by political people at the time was all bad science. It was all done by basically the industry. And they had very scientific studies showing that people who drank and breathed lead and didn't have any lead in their urine or their feces. The problem is lead's not excreted. It stays in the bones, collects in the brain. It's a deadly neurotoxin, and you didn't need science to show you that. People were dying in the factories where tetraethyl lead was being produced. But it was a wonderful invention because it allowed us to drive our high-compression automobiles without any knock, without any engine knock. And so everybody had it. And he said, well, I got to prove this. So he went to Antarctica and, as a part of the early effort to produce cores that allowed him to finally prove conclusively by 1953 that this lead in the atmosphere, this neurotoxin, began when we started putting it in gasoline. Well, he spent the next, 15, 16 years. He was threatened. Industry tried to get Caltech to fire him if they gave him a bunch of money. He was not allowed on government review panels that were actually studying the impact of lead. I mean, he suffered a considerable amount. He stayed the course through the enactment of the Clean Air Act in 1970, and finally, in 1986, the banning of lead in gasoline, and immediately we see an 80% reduction in atmospheric lead. It will probably never get rid of all of it because it stays around a long time. It's a story for me that is important because it tells us a lot more than just about tetraethyl lead. By the way, the guy who invented tetraethyl lead also invented another lovely compound called chlorofluorocarbons. And it took us another 20 years to get rid of those. But the whole story says to me that we human beings have this extraordinary capacity, unique to other species, to do wonderful things. And we have extraordinary destructive capacity. We're the only species with the capacity to harm another species from a distance. And we spent a lot of time over the last 500 years perfecting that and getting, that's the whole nature of modern warfare, to get so that you can kill people from further and further distance with greater and greater accuracy. It's this desire, and it makes us a bit vulnerable, by the way, when we go out in the wild. But that's, I guess, an evolutionary story. But we have this extraordinary capacity to both to do good and to do bad things. And it's hard when someone amongst us stands up and says something that you think is good, it produces something that you like, refrigeration, anti-knocking, and other sorts of things, that it's doing something bad, and you got to quit it. I mean, it took a tremendous amount of courage for Claire Patterson to fight this lost cause. And the same thing can be said about Mothers Against Drunk Driving. All the brave souls that were saying against the industry and that nicotine is addictive and taken as a drug is going to kill you. I mean, I said earlier, younger people that are enrolled here at the school probably think had to be 50 or 60 years ago when people who were flying in airplanes were smoking cigarettes. That was the middle 1990s. It was a contentious debate on the floor of the Senate. Frank Lautenberg actually led that out. It was a very contentious debate, and now you look back on it, and the reason it was contentious was we had to change. The rabble-rouser, the troublemaker, the person fighting the lost cause was saying that we're doing something that's not good for us. We're doing something that might be convenient, we're doing something that might make our life a little better at the margin, but there's something unhealthy in it, something that's bad in it. The trends are not going in the right direction, and that we don't have to be this way, that we can behave and act differently. And in every single instance, and I could cite many other besides. I mean, Jim and Sarah Brady, everybody thinks, well, that was fairly simple. You know, Jim Brady gets shot. They just passed the Brady bill. Well, it wasn't that simple. My guess is that they've got probably as much hate mail as a couple as any American couple that have ever fought any cause in American politics. My guess is the Brady bill wasn't all that popular in Montana. It sure as heck wasn't very popular in the state of Nebraska. But you know, at least I look at it, and it's kind of hard to make the case that it doesn't work. There isn't a reasonable restraint on our freedom to produce something that's good. So I'm saying all this to try to set up this description of a number of things that I think need, I would say at least one, and maybe as many as we could possibly stand, troublemakers, rabble-risers, fighters of lost cause, in order to change the things that we're doing. And I'd say again, I mean, I'm awed by our capacity to do good. But I'm also troubled by our capacity to do bad, and at times our tendency to sleepwalk through the whole thing because we have lost our belief. We've lost our belief that anything that anybody does can make any difference at all. I have heard, in fact, many people my age or approximately my age give young people advice that they shouldn't get involved. All you're going to do is break your heart. You're going to have a failure. You're going to lose, and it's not worth doing. The politician's going to disappoint you. The political leader is going to fail. They're going to have a personal failure of some kind, and all you're going to do is find yourself suffering as a consequence. So play golf. Check out. You don't have to do this. It's bad advice, in my view, because I think it puts this little experiment of ours in self-government at considerable risk. So out of a long list of possible subject matters, and now I'm aware that the clock is ticking, but I'll just pick three, and all I'm going to do is cite facts. I believe the facts all by themselves in the area of energy, entitlements, and education, K through 12 education, make the case that change at the margin is not going to get the job done, that unless we've got a rabble-rouser, a troublemaker, a fighter of lost cause, we're not going to change. That marginal change isn't going to get the job done. So here are the facts on energy. The population, that is to say the human population on the planet, is going to increase from 6 to 9 billion before a baby that's born today in the United States of America reaches middle age. And the number of cars and trucks on the planet is going to double to more than 2 billion before the baby that's born in America today reaches their 20s. And the number of jetliners that fly all over the world is going to double before they graduate from college. And the global consumption of oil is going to increase by 35%. The energy increases 65%. The supply is increasing by 10. You look at the facts, and I could cite more facts, and you wonder what it's going to take. And my answer is it's going to take somebody to really be the rabble-rouser, troublemaker, fighter of lost cause, or we're apt to actually believe that, you know, getting rid of the federal tax on gasoline this summer is going to solve the problem. It won't. It'll, you know, it's going to give us one more dose of cheap energy, and in this case, probably we'll be borrowing the money from the Chinese and shipping it to people who hate us. But it's not what I would call a solution to the problem. The second is in some ways harder because this really hits close to home for most of us. And that is entitlements, the three big ones: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And the Social Security is a marginal problem as far as I'm concerned. It's, I mean, I won't go into the details of it, but all the fear-mongering on that is I think, wasted time and energy. Healthcare is a big one, and change at the margin isn't going to solve it. And I'll just give you the facts. These are facts. This is not, I'm not trying to stir you up. These are just facts. These three programs, the payments for these three programs for the 37 million beneficiaries in 2000 was a little over $600 billion, federal payments. In 2007, still 37 million beneficiaries, it was $952 billion. And the baby boomers start to retire in 2 years, and actually they're getting their Social Security at 62, so they got that, they started that this year. And the number of retirees, the beneficiaries, is going to go to 75 or 6 million, and the number of workers is going to stay about the same. And you listen to our answer. Our answer is, oh, I got an answer for you. We're going to restrict immigration and promise more. Well, I got news for you. That's going to make the problem worse. It may, again, may get a round of applause, but it doesn't solve the problem. And I actually heard Pat Williams talking about his solution for this one. And it's have to be the right one, but I'll promise you it's not marginal change. We're going to have to do things differently. And because if all we do is ask the political leaders for more, and ask the political leaders for more and less, for less, we're not going to solve the problem. You'd look for an easy solution for this one, and there's not one there. We need a rabble-rouser, troublemaker, fighter of lost cause to get us to break out of this dumb current that we're being drug along in. The third area is K through 12 education, and it's the first time in American history that people entering the workforce are less educated and prepared for the workforce than those who are leaving it. And that's about the only fact you need. You can look at all of the numbers and listen to all of the cases about how good a job we're doing in K through 12. You can't be doing a good job in K through 12 if that fact is true, and that fact is true. Both conservatives and liberals confirm that as a fact that's true. The dropout rates in urban America, the actual dropout rates of students when they start ninth grade, finish 4 years later, might be 12 years later actually, it's over 40%. In every large urban area in America, which produces well over half of all the high school graduates every single year. Too many of our best and brightest aren't going into teaching. And that's been a problem that's been going on for 20 years. Now, it's true you can get people to go into education, K through 12 education, because they love the work. But we're going to have to do something different. I mean, they're doing other things. Some of them are just heroically going into because they love it, but there's something wrong with the work conditions. There's something wrong with the pay. In my view, we pass No Child Left Behind, and all we're really doing is having the teachers test more and do more work that might give us a bit more accountability. It might tell us where something good and something bad is happening, but I don't think it solves the problem. I think it might make political leaders feel a bit better, but I don't see, from my own, I disclosed it earlier, I've got a 6-year-old who goes to public school in New York City, and I don't see the metrics that are being used by the political leaders to be the metrics that I use to measure whether or not my child is doing well. On every single test that measures international test scores, our graduates our students are underperforming in math and science. And you can't run on your seed corn forever. Eventually, and I think we're at that point, you begin to lose your competitive edge. You begin to lose your capacity to innovate. You begin to lose your capacity to have higher standards of living for the next generation. And we just continue to cling to this idea that this radically decentralized and managed educational system is the best we possibly can, and we praise it to no end. And in many ways and in many cases and in many instances, it's terrific. But by the objective facts, I do not believe that marginal change is going to produce what we need. It didn't produce what we needed 100 years ago, and it's not going to produce what we need in the 21st century. And again, I cite it as an area where we need a rabble-rouser, a troublemaker, a person willing to fight a lost cause to solve this problem and get us to do something differently. Now, I don't know how to end this presentation, actually, other than to say that I continue to count myself in the group of Americans who are optimistic about our capacity to do things better. And I'll close with a story, actually, that I heard in 1988 that, to my mind, captures both the futility and the promise of democracy. This was my first run for the Senate. I was out in western Nebraska, went to a nursing home, and first asked this elderly woman, I guess that's redundant, if she wanted to dance. There was a little group of people playing music. It was a Friday afternoon. And she said, "I ain't dancing with no damn Democrat." Okay. So then I said to her, "Well, what do you think of this campaign between myself and the incumbent senator?" She said, "Sonny, to me it looks like the same old manure, just a different group of flies." Well, it's the kind of story that could actually encourage people to walk away in disgust from politics. Or it could, it did so with me, cause you to answer the call that whatever it is that rings your bell, whatever it is that you believe is wrong that needs to be done differently, whatever cause it is that causes you to say, I'm going to put some time and energy and risk maybe having some friends not like me anymore, whatever it is, I mean, a story like that, at least it has, as I said, for me, kept me going over the years. So I guess I could have said this in the beginning and kept the speech awfully shorter. My hope, my sincere hope and purpose for coming here, other than I'm afraid of Judy Rainey, is to hope for all of you that you choose to stay in the game. Thank you very much.
President Kerrey has agreed to answer some questions. What I would ask you to do, because we are broadcasting this and we'll record it, or we're recording this on podcasts and we'll run it again later, is to come to the microphones so that everybody can hear the question and the podcast can hear it as well. If you'd state your name and then the question, it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tim Bernard, and I liked your talk. It was very good. And I really appreciate that you're a veteran and stuff. And I could talk about a lot of stuff, but because of triage, I think I just have one simple question for you. How could you sign off on that 9/11 Commission report where there was no discussion of building number 7? And as a military person, you've got to understand NORAD, first time in 50 years it stands down. None of the planes are intercepted at all. We have prior knowledge. I'm sure Osama didn't call up Willie Brown and say, dude, you better cancel your flight. And I'm sure Osama didn't call up the Joint Chiefs of Staff and have them cancel their meeting on September 11th in Manhattan. The list just goes on, but those are just some of the key points. And would you be interested in a real investigation that answers how a 47-story building, over 500 feet tall, magically falls down at 5 o'clock, about 5:30 in the afternoon, when nothing hit it? Thank you.
Well, I mean, first of all, understand, I was there all day long. So I ran to that building in the morning. My baby was born the day before, so and on this one, I got some skin in the game. The problem in this one is, to answer directly to your question, is yes. I mean, I've actually already said publicly, I do think that a permanent commission is necessary in order to answer some of the questions that we simply didn't have time or access to be able to answer. And there's a fair amount of questions about World Trade Center 7 that you've identified that have not been answered at all. I mean, look, I do think that I mean, you asked me why I signed it. I signed it because I think that the commission did get the larger narrative of the story correctly. But there's flaws in the process. I mean, the hardest and most difficult one to assess is that I said it earlier to the little seminar, but I'm willing to assert that I've been on more commissions than any living American today. I'm on 2 right now. I mean, I just feel like I used to collect stamps and now I do commissions. And this one was unique. I've never been on one quite like this. I might have said no had I assessed the situation differently. And I said yes because I was vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee and I knew a fair amount about the story before of who bin Laden was. The thing that made this one unique is that you had to go to essentially 5 places in Washington, D.C. or the Washington, D.C. area in order to read and get access to documents. The documents that we were given. Some documents administration withheld permanently. We never got access to them. But even the ones we were given access, it's how it worked. Take the train down to Washington, spend the day reading documents, and my notes I have to leave my notes wherever it was that I was examining. I mean, they couldn't be removed. Sandy Berger demonstrated, unfortunately. But and then when you want to go back and check and prepare for a hearing, you go back to that same place again, and you couldn't take the notes of your notes out. So the friction, the regulatory friction on getting access to things was enormous. And I don't think you can do it part-time. And we were part-time commissioners. I think you need it's the strongest reason I believe that you need something that is full-time, because you're examining secret documents and you're examining secret records and on a going forward basis. Taking 9/11, because first of all, I don't think you're ever going to get to the bottom of everything that's out there in this particular story, because you begin with a presumption, unlike the assassination of President Kennedy. Here you begin with a conspiracy. Nobody disagrees. There was a conspiracy. The only question is who's all involved with it. And there's alternative theories of who was involved, but I feel at the moment, the evidence that I've seen, that the outline of the conspiracy we had accurately. But the problem is there were a lot of areas that we didn't fully examine. The clock ran out. I mean, the commission was given an extension of 6 weeks. We finished our business on the 24th of July, 2004, and we were done. Our subpoena powers ended, our authority was over, and we're out of business. So I think under the circumstances, the narrative was pretty good. The footnotes reveal and describe in a number of areas where additional investigation and effort needs to be done. And Congress, in my view, either needs to do that investigation or create something permanent. Again, both to give people a slightly better level of comfort. I don't think you're ever going to unravel all of it. But most importantly, right now, the big question is, are we doing enough or are we doing too much? And my own suspicions are we're doing too much. I mean, I think the greatest danger with a terrorist act, and this was a terrorist act, very few people disagree with that. The problem is that there's a tendency to overreact, and it's an understandable tendency. I'm not saying Al-Qaeda isn't an existential threat. I don't believe Islamic terrorists are going to be cajoled back into the society of rational, caring human beings by singing Kumbaya around a campfire. I don't think you can negotiate with them, but this is not the Wehrmacht. This is not 100 divisions of army. This is a relatively small, definable force, and there's a tendency to exaggerate. And I think as a consequence, you spend more money, do more than you ought to, and restrict freedoms beyond what is reasonable. So, but I don't know. Because what happens every time I get into a conversation with somebody who is in Congress today, who's on the Intelligence Committee, who has they say typically, if you only knew what I knew. Oh, well, okay. How about if you knew what I knew? just because I've been there. I got to a point where some of those briefings that I got when I was on the Intelligence Committee, I know why I'm getting it. You're giving me a briefing, so I can't talk about it. Yeah, I think some sort of permanent commission would be a very good thing to do to get at the bottom of some of the questions that you raised and others have raised, but more importantly to give citizens a better sense that we're doing as much as we need, but not more than is necessary.
You are aware that Raymond Governor, CIA analyst, wrote briefing papers for Reagan and Bush one, also Klaus von Bülow, a ex-defense minister for Germany, ex-president of the Italian government, and all said it was an inside job. You are aware of that.
Yeah, I'm aware of lots of things in that regard, but I don't believe it's true. Yeah. I've spent a lot of time with CIA analysts who told me lots of things that were going to happen, that did happen, that in fact weren't. Just because somebody says, my name's so-and-so and I was a CIA analyst, remember the CIA analyst said it's a slam dunk that Iraq's got weapons of mass destruction. So it's not exactly exhibit A for acquiring confidence because somebody's a CIA analyst that they know what the hell's going on. So I've heard the answer is to your statement, your question. I am aware of it. I have met with and read a number of alternative scenarios, but I just stick with my own conclusion that I do think we got the general outline correctly, and I don't see evidence of an inside job.
I'd like to bring up a totally different subject. I'd like you to say a bit about the role in education in this country over many generations, I think, of the new school, particularly in bringing in and educating new immigrants to this country and imbuing in some of them a sense of American democracy. And before you answer, I'd like to bring up an anecdote of a friend of mine. I'm a retired faculty member here, but when I was a very young faculty person somewhere else, I had a friend who was himself at that point retired, living on an island in Lake Michigan, who had come to the United States at the end of the First World War, had been in New York, gone to the new school, and was essentially educated in American democracy there, became a member of the New Deal, and was assigned the job of putting together the first of several attempts at interracial community farms. This was in Missouri. Not something that was welcomed by many of the people who lived around there, and which he succeeded at only because he was willing to break some rules, and among other things, he had to negotiate with a union that was trying to unionize the camp. The head of the union happened to be an American communist, and as a result of this, Hans Bosch, a Danish immigrant, lost his job and was demoted during the Truman administration, many ranks down, to an Indian agency in Idaho. But he picked himself up and did something there that no one had ever done before. Namely, he arranged the first dinner together between the tribal elders and the leaders of the local white community in Pocatello. And this was his response to what, of that particular tough spot in American history, of the McCarthy era. I think the new school had something to do with the way he handled that. Perhaps it did.
Well, the history of New School takes you to some uncomfortable places in American history. Founded in 1919 in response to the requirement of loyalty oath and other sorts of things like that came about as a result of the Alien and Sedition Act that was signed by the great, liberal Woodrow Wilson. And it takes you to the Palmer raids and the Red Scare and the rise of the American Legion, the Ku Klux Klan. It was in the first Immigration Act, first restriction of immigration, 1924. And I've read that act. It's not easy reading. If you begin it feeling good about your country, if you want to read it, it doesn't feel like a proud moment in American legislation. And then in '33, the new school actually became much more of a university. It started out in the early days, it opposed to tenure, opposed to for-credit education, opposed to endowments. We're suffering that legacy. It was very avant-garde because it was the radical idea at the time was educating people who were already educated. So, they had these phenomenal intellectuals who would come and lecture, and the audience would pay, and it was a real innovation at the time. But '33 was the moment because, and also you pull back the covers and you see something unpleasant in the United States. The Buns in New York City, close to anti-Semitism of Cordell Hull, the Secretary of State of the United States. We never filled our quota of Jewish immigrants. And the president of the new school, actually from Nebraska, father had been hustled out of Denmark by a Jewish peddler, and in his autobiography says, he was raised in a pro-Semitic household. So when the National Socialist Party came to power, he joined the Emergency Rescue Committee and persuaded the Rockefellers to give him the money, and brought 1 out of 7 German Jewish intellectuals to the new school, became the university in exile. So it was a phenomenal humanitarian gesture, but it was very brave because there was opposition. There was significant political opposition to it. But today, I just tell you, the secret weapon in New York City is immigrants. It may be that my kids don't understand the American dream, but this immigrant community sure as heck does. It's alive and well in their hearts. And they're working like heck, and they're saving their money, and they're holding their families together, and they're working their way up the food chain as fast as they can go. And, the rest of the country may become anti-immigrant. And if they do, New York City will continue to have a competitive advantage, socially, politically, and economically. Even after 9/11, if any community had a right to pull up the welcome mat, it was New York City. We have 800,000 Muslims in the 5 boroughs of New York City. It's pretty amazing, and especially with the internet and with cell phones, they have immediate contact back to their home country. And so if you want to find out what's really going on in Pakistan and what's really going on in India, what's really going on in Bangladesh or China or elsewhere, all you have to do is go to the right neighborhood, get in the right taxi cab, have the right conversation. You can find out a hell of a lot more than you get from a briefing from a CIA analyst, that's for sure. So it's remarkable. And so, we've just, without me doing anything at all, we've got almost 30% of our students who are international. And boy, it's inspiring. They work hard and they study hard, and no sense of entitlement. It's pretty amazing. And they inspire the other students and teach the other students as well. So the community is enriched in lots of ways.
That young man, I believe, was waiting.
Oh,
yes, sir. Thank you for taking my question. My name is Bill. My question has to do with the 9/11 Commission, their failure to investigate a couple of facts. The fact that Mahmoud Ahmed, the head of Pakistani ISI, wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta, the head hijacker, and the Commission found that of no consequence. They didn't investigate that, or the fact that Mahmoud Ahmed was also in Washington, D.C. on the 11th meeting with George Tenet, the head of the CIA. And I was curious to hear your comment.
Well, the second part of that story, that's news to me. The first part, we did do some investigation of that, and it's actually in the footnotes. But it's a terrific example. We've got too little time and too few resources to run down every lead. You start off with a conspiracy that's worldwide and 20 years old. That's the problem. And it's exceptionally difficult to run down every single thing that's out there. I mean, we discovered a whole cache of NSA documents about 2 weeks before the commission was out of business. And we put it in the report that further investigation needs to occur. I mean, we didn't get access to the key witnesses. We had to submit questions, and the CIA took them over there and wherever they are, and we now know they're at Gitmo, and submitted them. It's an unsatisfactory. We noted that in the commission report. So I don't view the commission as a final statement as a final word. I am quite strong in the belief that I don't find the evidence of an inside job compelling. I just don't find it compelling. Far too many people had to be involved. I mean, Jesus, they can't keep a secret in Washington about anything. I mean, the idea that you're going to have a conspiracy that would have taken hundreds of people being involved with, that not a single leak has occurred, it's impossible. But again, I don't claim that the CIA, that the 9/11 report is the last word on this thing at all. I think much more investigation is both justified and would be constructive.
There's been lots of whistleblowers that have come out saying involved in science and national security, including FBI agents like Robert Wright, who died at 9/11 in the World Trade Center on his first day. And he was taking the place of I forget the name of the company, but it was partially owned by Marvin Bush, the younger Bush brother.
Yes.
My name is Mike Chesson. I'm a retired botanist here at the University of Montana and served for over 40 years. I'd like to take you back to the late 50s and early 60s, to a time when there was a lot of concern about the radioactive fallout and the nuclear arms race. Some of us here at the university joined with others around the country to form what we call the Science Information Movement. This was really it was chaired by Barry Commoner and Margaret Mead. Well, some of our younger folks here tonight may not recognize those names, but I'm sure you will.
I do.
The local group was very active in working to get the limited test ban treaty. We were unsuccessful as far as getting all nuclear tests banned, but at least we did get the nuclear tests in the atmosphere banned. I'm saying that only because when some of us were back east at a meeting at AAAS, that a member of the Public Health Service told us that you folks, meaning, of course, not only us, but the whole movement around the country, were about 25 similar committees like ours, which were trying to educate the public about these issues. You folks were responsible for getting the limited test ban treaty because you created an atmosphere, an ambience, which made that possible in the U.S. Senate. We thought we had done something very important for humanity, and we continued our work, hoping that we would get a complete elimination, eventual total elimination of nuclear weapons before too long, at least during our lifetimes. Now that hope seems to have disappeared. It's very discouraging, as you know. I really appreciate your comments about speaking truth to power and being a rabble-rouser. We thought our rabble-rousing, which created quite a bit of opposition at the time, would eventually produce something that was important for humanity. Now we're in a situation, we're in a position where we seem to be going backwards. And it's very discouraging, not only for us, but for the rest of our fellow citizens and the rest of the world, when a rabble-rouser, who are we going to we don't need to rabble-rouse the people on these issues. The people are completely with us on, for example, the elimination of nuclear weapons, and our government is not. So we have a government that, like Ike's military-industrial complex, is taking advantage of that power and has given the people no succor at all. We can't move, and this is creating what I feel is a very dangerous situation in this country with other people that feel completely frustrated with a government which should have been impeached years ago, seems to be getting away with murder, literally. What do we do? I mean, where can we turn our efforts when you have all this power? The power of the press, which creates a public which does not understand, is not fully, is very difficult to educate by people like independent scientists, that it makes it a very frustrating situation. And we had a recent example of something like this. It's another issue. It's the question of sweatshops around the world that are selling all kinds of goods to university campuses and others, of course. And we had some students here at the university that took steps of their own. They were very intelligent and concerned group of students, and it seems like civil disobedience or more seems to be required now. And we can't just be rabble-rousers unless we're willing to take some more direct action. Now, do you have any advice for those of us who feel this way?
Well, I would say, be of good cheer, for God's sakes. We had the leading arms control expert running for president in 2000, and the election was stolen from him. If Al Gore had been president of the United States of America, I have no doubt that he would have moved to, from where we were to a substantial reduction and get us to a platform where we could consider elimination. But we lost the election, and we lost it again in 2004. And I personally don't think it's the military-industrial complex. George Bush didn't hide anything. He told us he was an evangelical Christian. He told us he was conservative. He's told us what his ideology was, and he's president. I don't like that fact, but he's president, and this too will pass. And we got another bite of the apple here in November, and it's a story of King Lear. You give up, and tragedy ensues. It's one of the problems of this in this game of life is that there's no such thing as a timeout. I think the general problem with nuclear weapons is since the end of the Cold War, the fear has diminished substantially, and I know this very, very well because I attempted to do something that I thought was rather simple in the Senate. And you should know this. There's a thing called the Single Integrated Operating Plan. Guys probably know what it is. It's a targeting plan for nuclear weapons. And it's developed right there in Omaha, Nebraska at Stratcom. And basically what it says is we've got airborne, land-based, and sea-based nuclear weapons, and here's where they're aimed, or here's where they will be aimed, now that they're all taken off of hair trigger alert. So I said to myself, let's see, how many do we got now? 6,000? What's the smallest one? 100 kilotons? That does a lot of damage, 100 kiloton nuclear weapon. How many does it take to do the job? 6,000 seems like a lot. Can you show me the target? Show me the targeting. No, we can't, because we only show it to the gang of 12 or whatever it was. I'm trying to remember what the exact number was. It's both John and, you got to remember, Pat, what the number was. It was certain people, chairman of the Armed Services Committee and the chairman of the Intel, whatever. We only briefed them. So I said, look, here's what I'll do. I'll arrange for a joint meeting of every single person in the Senate. I don't know what the list is, so you have all 100 of us, all 100 Republican and Democrat. And I'll get, at that time, it was Trent Lott and Tom Daschle to convene the meeting. I want you to bring the targeting in. It's okay, we'll do it. So we show up in the skiff on the 4th floor of the Capitol, and it was basically the same old manure that they've been giving me for years, which is, they've been targeting. It was just sort of general characteristics of where the land-based guys were going to go in the air. So then I sent the Secretary of Defense, Cohen, a letter saying, we just had this briefing, we didn't get what we want. Who gets briefed? He said, only the leadership. I said, well, that's interesting, because I talked to both the Democratic and the Republican leader, both the House and the Senate. Neither one of them had been briefed. Well, then he sends me a letter. Only the president gets briefed. Really? So I saw Bill Clinton at a social event, and I asked him, have you seen the PSYOP? And he did one of these. Yes. Well, that meant no. So it is my belief that it is highly likely there isn't a single elected representative of the people of the United States of America has ever seen the targeting plan for nuclear weapons. And I'll just tell you, in my view, at the absolute most, you need 6 Trident submarines. 2 out, 2 back, 2 in repair. I mean, each one of them has 192 100-kiloton nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. I mean, that'll shut down any country on this planet. We get Japan to unconditionally surrender with Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So, I don't know, but what's happened is, when you talk about it, the audience doesn't get all worked up, because they've forgotten the doomsday clock, and they've forgotten the fear that we had all the way through the Cold War about the bullet out of the blue. So again, so I think eventually this one, I could have put this on my list as well, except it didn't start with E. So I would just say, don't give up. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Well, I hope you won't either.
I won't.
Thank you.
Yes.
My name's Rita Jedkowska-Bradley, and thank you very much for your speech. It couldn't be more timely at this university, like Mike Chesson did mention, that we had 8 students from economic and social justice who had practiced an act of civil disobedience at the president's office this week, because they were troublemakers, rebel rousers, and fighters of lost cause. They are standing up to make sure that all the grizzware that is bought by the university and supplied meets human rights. The workers have minimum human rights, and so that they can have decent wages and are allowed to organize in their workplaces and not suffer sexual harassment and various things like that. 42 other universities did this, and the students, along with support from faculty and community organizations, have been working for about 2 years to try to get this through the university, and trying to get meetings. And because they were very frustrated, they did this act of civil disobedience, which was to sit in the president's office, and they were given 3 days of suspension. And I feel, I'm wondering, you were saying the worst advice to give young people is not to get involved. And I feel these students were very courageous. They certainly are ones that I admire very much, and I'm working with organizations that support them, and I just wonder what the role of, you think the role of a university president is to respond to students' concerns such as this.
Well, first of all, I don't have all of the facts in the case, and I think it's an arguable point. I mean, I'm not sure it's as clear-cut a case, but leaving the facts aside, it seems to me the university president here said, here are the rules, make your case, and here's what you can do, and here's what you can do. And they did some things they couldn't do, and the punishment was relatively mild, it seemed to me, and the students took the consequences. I think it's It's and now my guess is there's a larger number of people in the community that are aware of this problem, have views on it, have a greater set of facts than they had before. And my guess is it's a demonstration of a successful political action. Not one without consequence, but that's the whole point that I'm trying to make, is that if you think rabble-rousing and troublemaking and fighting lost cause has no consequence at all, then it's not rabble-rousing, troublemaking, and fighting of lost cause. It's something else. I don't know what it is, but that's not what it is. I mean, I endorsed Hillary Clinton about 4 months ago. I've had friends who've emailed and said, "You're no longer my friend." All I did is endorsed her. You know, it's not like I'm rabble-rousing, troublemaking, fighting a lost cause. It feels a bit like a lost cause at the moment. But all I did is endorse her. And it produced people telling me how much they hate her, for God's sakes. So, but I didn't say, oh, geez, that's unfair and that shouldn't happen. And no, there's consequences. I mean, all the contentious issues of the debate, that's why they're called contentious issues. You know, if your political cause is daylight savings time, you're not likely to face any political consequences. But if it's trying to get the university to change its policies, and they don't want to change the policy for whatever the reason, good or bad, there's going to be consequences to political action. But I think it appears to me, I just read this morning's newspaper, and it seems to me like it was a success, like they accomplished a great deal.
I know it's late, but I just wanted to ask one last question. You were talking earlier today about the executive branch versus the legislative branch.
Yes.
And how Article 1 was sort of being subsumed to Article 2. I thought maybe you could say a few more words about that.
Yeah, I think there's been a substantial and unhealthy and at times dangerous shift of power from the legislative to the executive branch. And I think the people have much, much, much more control over their legislators than they do the president and the executive branch agencies. You think how easy is it to get an answer from a member of Congress versus trying to get FBI Director Mueller to answer a question, or John Ashcroft to answer a question, or Don Rumsfeld. Pick anybody. It could be somebody that we all like. They've got executive power, and you have to get a subpoena from Congress in order to get documents and appearances. You have much less control, and our founders knew it. That's what I said earlier was, it isn't Article 1 by accident. You know, if they wanted the executive branch to have more power than the legislative, the executive branch would be Article 1. The executive branch is Article 2. And, you know, but I see with President Bush and his allies, strict constructionists all are not being very strict constructionists when it comes to interpreting what the Constitution says the executive branch is supposed to be. So I think there's been way too much power. And the example that I used earlier is, it's quite remarkable to me that earmarks have become unpopular. Is it true that members of Congress waste money on things that they earmark? Yes. Do they waste more than the executive branch on contracts for ships, on contracts for, I mean, my God, the answer is no. But if I earmark something, and I did a lot of it when I was in the Senate, and people didn't like it, and oftentimes they didn't, they come right to me and raise hell. And they can say that I'm going to give you a lesson in practical political science. There are two things that you need to know if you're trying to get any senator, any representative to do something. Carol, I hope I don't give away a dark secret here. First is you have to answer the question, so the only two answers are yes or no. Because if the answer is, if the answer is maybe, it's not an answer. So my favorite example is a group of concerned parents come in and we are concerned about our schools, and I say, yeah, I'm concerned about the schools too, and our kids and the future of our kids, et cetera, et cetera. And they walk out and they say, God, the Senator Kerry's great because he's concerned about our schools too. And then I vote against every single thing that they wanted. You've got to say, as people who have a lot of money, there's a number of large corporations, a number of large not-for-profits, a number of individuals, in fact, that when they come to Washington, they're very precise. Most of them are already there. And they'll come in, won't they, John? They'll come in, they'll say, here's 50 words we want in a markup that's going to occur tomorrow. Will you offer this amendment in markup? There's no gray stuff going on here. It's black or white. It's yes or no. And maybe there's a PAC check in it for you. So the second is that the most fearsome phrase that any of us in politics can ever hear is, I will never vote for you again. You write that down in your own handwriting, you say that in your own words, and you get our attention. I promise you, you get our attention. Now, we may say, in the end of the day, look, our position's different on abortion or death penalty. Some of these things that you take your position and you're not likely to change it, flag burning or something like that. But still, if you hear that person say that to you, so I mean, but you can't say, I'll never vote you again vote for you again for the Secretary of Defense, or the Secretary of Education, or anybody in the Justice Department, or God forbid, the Department of Homeland Security. I think one of the worst federal agencies that's ever been created in the history of this republic. I mean, the idea that a conservative Republican administration created an uber organization, uber called Homeland Security, with a plus up of $40 billion. They had people who didn't know what the hell they were doing, with lines of people from Washington, D.C. all the way to Missoula, Montana, queuing up to try to get some of your money. Whatever that agency is, you know, to try to get a meeting and try to get something done is exceptionally difficult. Whereas your senator, your representative, it's, if I don't get in to see you, if you don't return my phone call, if you don't do what I want, I'm not going to vote for you again. And on earmarks, I got that a lot. People would say, you brought $10 million to the University of Nebraska, that's pork barrel. And I'd have to explain what it was. And I either persuaded them or I didn't. Sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. But this whole earmark has been turned upside down. So the people in large numbers today, all three presidential candidates, in congressional earmarks, and the audiences are giving them a round of applause, and I'm thinking, what the heck are you doing? This is a president. This isn't your Congress. Don't give them that power. Don't take that power away from your Congress. You'll regret it. So I think it's been a dangerous shift for me as an individual to the executive branch over the last 7 years, and I'm going to do all I can in this next election to make sure it is reversed.
To the Kimmitt family, Judy, Mary, and Johanna, thank you for being with us tonight at the University of Montana. And to President Kerrey, thank you so much for taking the time and making the effort to come out here right before commencement. Good night to you all.